I'm amazed that everybody's here and so grateful that you're here. And also wanted to mention the email went out last night that one of the founding members of our community, Arnie Cover, passed away yesterday. And he suffered from a long illness, and it was not COVID-19, but he was there from very, very early days. And he Zichrono Baruch, and I want to take a minute, just remember him and dedicate this session to him. Even though, as an inveterate member of the Sons of Lithuania, he would not be sympathetic to some of the things I'm going to talk about. But nevertheless, he loved to laugh, and he had a great sense of humor, a wry sense of humor, and we will miss him. And more information will be forthcoming from the family and friends. Okay, Daron, I guess
Right.
throw it back to you.
Okay, so as I referenced earlier, and I think it's a good place to start, is that this book was 40 years in the making, and I wondered if you wanted to share its long and storied history, and how we got to this moment.
Okay, I'd be happy to. And life is weird, you know. Life is very strange and full of surprises, and sometimes the surprises are good ones. Um, I sort of want to start off by saying, you know, a lot of you know me, some of you know me recently. I didn't write this book. I'm a 70-year-old guy. I've been married for 30 some odd years. I have grown children, and I recently retired from a career. And this book was written by a young 28-year-old man who was full of ambition and also had all sorts of unrealistic expectations. And he was the one who wrote it. And I thought it's just for 1 second show who he was. I'm going to share the screen, and I'm going to, can people see this?
Not yet.
No?
Not yet.
No? Share screen. All right.
You have to choose the screen you want to share in the white box that's going to open.
Oh, okay. Oh, there it is. There, share screen. And share. Okay, sorry guys. Here's the young man from 1970 something who actually wrote this, and this picture was taken in the Boston Arboretum many years ago. Okay.
And we all know that Jed is your son.
Okay, I'm gonna minimize that. Right, minimize that. Stop share.
Stop share. Yeah,
Stop share. Okay, so so what happened 40 years ago? 40 years ago, I got out of graduate school. I'd spent years and years studying literature and said, okay, I want to put my own little oar in and write a little bit of literature. And I wrote this book about life in the Chavura world. And when I wrote it, you know, that was the days before internet and email and personal computers. And so I took a year, I wrote it by hand in Paris and Jerusalem, living out the fantasy of being a young man in Paris. Came home, typed it up, and then sent around to all the people who I knew who might be literarily connected in these big fat boxes full of my photocopied versions, and I send them around. And I mean, it did get a couple of acceptances of pieces of it. Some of the stories went into this place called Phoenix Rising. This is probably the ugliest cover I've ever seen. At the Temple of Baseball. But the whole thing never got published. And so I took my big fat boxes and I stuck them in storage, and I said, all right. And that was 40 years ago. And then about a dozen years ago, I said, well, maybe something will happen to the storage locker. There'll be a fire and a flood. I might as well put it, at least digitize it. And made it into a PDF. And so I made it into a PDF, and I opened the book and I started to read it, and I couldn't bear it. It was just I just saw too many things wrong with it, and then I realized it really needed editing. So I put it back away, and I just said, I can't deal with this. And then a few years ago, about 2 years ago or so, Chavura Salon was going to have a 50th anniversary. It was going to celebrate the 50th anniversary of its founding. And all sorts of things were happening. A reunion was planned, and Brandeis University was putting together a conference, and they put together an archives, and people started writing some articles about the founding of the Chavura in the early years. And David Roski said, well, he'd like to also write an article about the early years. David was a member of the Chavura way back when, and so we started asking around for materials that were written back then. And he spoke to Bonnie Fetterman, who used to work at Shocking Books and is a publishing consultant. And I had shared my manuscript with her 40 years ago, and she said it wasn't right for Shocking. So, but she remembered it, and she mentioned to David, she said, did you ever read David Kronfeld's manuscript? And I've known David for many, many years, but uh, we did not overlap at the Chavura. And he said, no, I didn't know that I'd written anything. So one day at shul, I took a little flash drive, and I went over and I snuck it into his hand and put it in his pocket. And he went off to sabbatical. And months later, he returned and said, I read it. I read a different story every Shabbat, and I think it should be preserved and shared. And I said, well, it really needs editing. He said, yeah, okay. At some point, you'll edit it. And so exactly a year ago, I retired, and I edited it and put it out. And now here it is. And so it's kind of amazing that after all these years, here it is as a real book. And I brought you all together, which is the best part of it.
So you took your year of fantasy in France and in Israel to write.
Mhm.
Why was the Chavurat Shalom story the story? This small countercultural community of
Right.
all things. I'm not sure that I would, in choosing the great American novel, would that be the one? Why was this the piece that you felt drawn to?
Well, as I mentioned, I was full of unrealistic expectations at the time. And I thought there would be millions of people who would want to read about some little counterculture Jewish community. But also to the point, when I was 15, I had a teacher at Camp Ramah who was a great guy. And I told him, there I was, 15 years old, and I said to him, I think I'm going to go up and maybe I'll be a writer. And I thought he would be very encouraging, and he'd pat me on the back and say, oh, that's wonderful, you'll be great, just stick to it. And he brought me up short, totally. And he said, well, you got anything to say?
Mm.
And I never forgot it. It was one of these brilliant pieces of advice. And for a long time, I didn't have anything to say, really. And I thought, what was I going to say about, you know, post-war Jewish angst that Philip Roth hadn't said, or J.D. Salinger hadn't said, or somebody else hadn't said it way better than I was going to say it. But I had this great topic dropped in my lap, because you have to write about what you know. And there I knew about this counterculture community that I'd lived in. And it was a marvelous place. It was full of interesting people, and we did interesting things. And we took Judaism very seriously. And we also had a tremendous amount of fun with it. And I said, I've got this great topic. And it was virgin territory at the time. There was articles being written, poetry being written, not much fiction being written. So I said, okay, this is what I'm going to do. And
Right.
so,
So you call it fiction, and I want to know: are you Solomon? Is this the protagonist of this book is Solomon? Of course, anytime I hear Solomon and think Chavura, I think of Moshowitz. But
Right?
we
Who's
know that
on?
a
Hi,
different
Marsh.
Chavura. But is this just your memoir in another name?
Okay, what I have to say is absolutely, categorically, definitely no. This is fiction, and I'm sticking with it. And if it, certainly there are people, there are situations, places that I drew from, but things have been changed, fictionalized, in some ways exaggerated, wholly made up, and so it's fiction. And um, as I say, and as the old saying goes, you know, any resemblance to actual persons is purely coincidental.
But it was based on a real community. So,
It,
do you want to give us just a short, quickie experience tell us a little bit about your experience with the Chavura and where that came from? You know,
yeah,
how long
sure.
were you there? What were you, you know, what was that like?
Okay. First of all, I hesitate to say too much about what Chavurat Shalom is like, because it's a little bit like the blind man and the elephant.
Mhm.
Everybody who's going to tell you about what Chavurah Shalom is going to have a different perspective, and they're going to say something different. And that's okay, because it was a completely unhierarchical place and people had different experiences of it. So whatever I tell you is only one little piece in the mix. And there are also lots of other places one can go to find out about it. The Tauber Institute has had some wonderful conferences and lectures, and there's an oral history project at University of Pennsylvania, and people have interviews there, and those people have all sorts of different things to say. But what I do want to say about the Chavurah, it was Chavurah Shalom. It was a child of the '60s. You know, it was a way to rebel against our parents and our grandparents' way of doing Judaism, and yet to remain intensely Jewish. It's not that we rebelled and threw it away. We rebelled and redefined it, and um, it was by the time I got there, it was no longer trying to be a seminary, which it thought it might be in the early days. It was no longer trying to be a commune, which it thought it might be in the early days, but it was an intentional community. And it was a very intense intentional community. People made a tremendous commitment to be part of the community. And it was an enormously creative place, because we led services, we had classes, people taught whatever was on their mind, whatever they wanted to learn, and they brought to services whatever they wanted to do. They changed things, they added things, we took things out, and different people led services every time. So services were always different, they were creative, and most of all, they were fun. We had a great amount of fun with
Mm.
doing what we were doing. Um, we took it very seriously, but serious doesn't mean solemn. You know, serious can be done with, as Mark Paul likes to say, joy, but not just joy, but with humor and bringing in things from all over the place, and also a certain amount of irreverence.
So first of all, the peanut gallery, the chat room, has indicated that while names have been changed to protect the innocent, Krishna the cat and Caleb the dog still got their names mentioned in the book.
Exactly. Yes, because I decided that they were probably not going to sue me for defamation of character. So those those are actual
That's
characters.
actual characters. All right. I think it would be wonderful if you have can you read us a piece?
I would love to. In fact, I have two shorter stories, and I'd like to start off with one. Um, let's see. Okay, there's three short things I want to say before I read them. And the first thing, I, okay, the first thing I want to say is that there are five characters here, and you will have met those characters earlier. So I want to just give you a little background on these five characters. There is Solomon, he's the narrator. There is Esther, with whom he is having a relationship. There is Elisha, who is the son of an Orthodox rabbi and who made a tremendous breakaway from the Orthodox world into this scandalous world of alternative counterculture Judaism. There's Heiligman, who comes from the South and has a great deal of energy and enthusiasm, and his dog Caleb, who also has a great deal of energy and enthusiasm. And the other thing I want to say, okay, uh, there is like a piece of music. There is a directions: allegro, molto vivace, crescendo, poi meno mosso. Happy, upbeat, very vivacious, coming to a crescendo, and then less moved. And the final thing I want to say is I do not endorse the use of drugs, the abuse of any contraband substances. Parental discretion is advised. Okay, here we go. It's called Passover in the Park. Just a little more. Don't stop now. We're almost there. Just over this little stream. Take this little wooden bridge. Caleb, dummy, don't go in the water. You'll get all wet. Oh, hell. Here we go. Look at Caleb in the water. Now, just through this little gate right here, big old wrought iron gate, sign says public garden. Here we are. 1, 2, and we're in. Hooray. Woo-wee. Whoopie-doo. We have arrived. Hey, Esther, look at all these blossoms, pink and white, all these little green leaves. Hey, look over there, they're purple. Look at that crazy purple stuff growing on that tree. And yellow over there, look, there's yellow. Caleb, you beast, stop shaking water on me. Hey, Ligman, this is a wild animal you have here. Come on, Caleb, let's go run up that hill there. Woof, woof. Woof, woof yourself. Come on, run. And Caleb runs too. Chugging over the grass, up the hill, stomp, stomp, get to the top. Here we are, pant, pant, pant. Caleb panting too, sticking his long pink tongue out of his mouth. Here comes Esther and Heiligman. Elisha bringing up the rear, not used to running, a little on the plump side. Too much kugel, but he'll get over that soon enough. Fall down in the grass, spread eagle, arms, legs stuck out. Whew, that was a run. Look at Heiligman standing up on the top of this grassy hill now, stretching his hands way up in the sky. What's he gonna do? He's singing in his basso profundo, some old spiritual his mammy taught him, no doubt. Rock of my soul in the bosom of Abraham, rock of my soul in the bosom of Abraham. Hey, what's all this stuff about bosoms you're singing? And Esther starts in to do a little jig to Heiligman's song, dancing around, pirouetting on the bosoms, snapping her fingers, clapping her hands. Elisha going with the music, a little push in this direction, then a little push in that direction, his eyes closed. Suddenly, the singing stops. Hey, I'm going to climb this tree. Solomon, get up off the ground. Climb this tree with me. And Heiligman starts in to climb this big old tree with branches sticking out almost like a ladder for his feet. Alley-oop, and he is up on the first branch, the rest being easy from there. I follow, looking up at his tuchus as he is right over my head a couple of branches higher. Up we go, the branch is getting smaller, and we are high off the ground. If you fall, you break your head. High enough. Hey, you two, come on up this tree, it's easy. A skeptical look from Esther. A skeptical plus apprehensive look from Elisha. Come on. So Esther grabs hold of the bottom branch and wraps her legs around the trunk. Blanc, she cries in tangled terror. You can do it. A few great contortions, her legs working furiously, and she is, yes, she made it, up onto the bottom branch. Hooray! Carefully, she steps up the easy staircase of branches, and she is up the tree also. Elisha looking up, a weird perspective, all foreshortened as we look down on him from above. Come on, you can do it. Elisha being goaded by 3 now, and the 4th goad from inside finally prods him to jump up and grab the bottom branch. Yeah, he yells, and he is up onto the bottom branch, amazed at his capabilities. His own strength freaks him right out. He pulls himself up onto it, hugging onto it, realizing that he is, hot damn, in a tree. Up he comes, coming closer, his face traveling up to meet us. Here he is, all right. And then, there we all are, up a tree, And suddenly Caleb starts oh, and suddenly Caleb starts barking and jumping at the tree. Woof woof. Too bad, too bad. He's just a wild beast and can't make it up the tree. Sorry, Caleb, you stay down there. You keep watch. Ward off cops and robbers. We have some powerful business to attend to. Huh? What? What do you mean? But no words need explain as I pull from my pocket a little plastic sandwich bag with a patented seal that locks the freshness in. And in the bag are lots of little green leaves, which remind us of spring. We've come about as high as our hands and feet are going to take us. So now we must lift our spirits, elevate our minds. And I pull out a little flat cardboard package with the zigzag man on the flap. Why didn't you just roll some before we left? Esther says. I didn't have time. We just came here so quick, I didn't have time to roll nothing. I just grabbed my stash and my little golden roach clip and brought it along with me, I say, pulling a paper out from behind the zigzag man. Let me see that for a minute, Alicia asks, taking the package of papers. Hey, we can't smoke this stuff, he says, amazed, astounded, crushed. Why not? This is rice paper. It says so right here. Rice is chametz. Oh man, listen, we're not going to eat it. We're only going to smoke it. It doesn't matter. You can't even own it. You've got to sell it to the goyim or burn it. Well, so let's burn it right now. First, though, let's put a little of this funny stuff inside of it just to facilitate combustion. You've got to burn it before the holiday. Man, if I burned it all before the holiday, I wouldn't be able to walk for a week. I didn't mean that. Well, listen, says Heiligman, not wanting to lose this marvelous opportunity just because we cannot figure a way around it. The Sephardim eat rice on Passover. They don't think it's chametz. That's right, I say, hope springing up like a palm tree in the desert. The Sephardim eat rice on Passover. Well, in this case, we must be ecumenical about it, share in the heritage of our brothers of the Eastern tribes. So I roll this big fat joint for all of us, twist the ends, give it a lick, and prepare to do the honors. Friends, says Alicia, clasping his hands in front of him, we are now about to partake of the great Sephardic tradition of roasting the Paschal joint. But no one is to be caught still smoking after midnight because the park closes at 8. Amen. And scritch goes the match, and swoosh, we are on our way. Around and around it goes, perfectly protected by a million little green leaves, which shield us from all our foes who might give us the evil eye. Smoke it all in, that's right. Breathe deeply and let all that sacred incense fill up your lungs. Deep breaths, and away we go. Zoom, and we are on our way, quickly gaining altitude. Up we go into the sky, clear up out of our heads and into the blue. This is Cape Canaveral reporting to Brain Center. What a blast off. Keep going, man. Don't stop now. Whoosh, and we are flying over the park, free of our bodies, free of gravity, reaching the abyss that suspends itself over outer space. We have broken through the barrier and we are on our way. Yes, we are higher than this tree, higher than that little kite up there in the sky, higher than those big, white, fleecy, plump, and juicy clouds that are now taking on 1,000,000 shapes and changing their faces 100 times as we look down upon them from above through the windows of the spaceship of our minds. Our minds. Our mind. My mind. Your mind. Yes, your mind. What goes through your mind when you're stoned? Everything goes through your mind. Nothing goes through your mind. That is, everything goes through your mind, but nothing goes through your mind. Your mind goes through your mind. Yet your mind doesn't go anywhere. It's just there. Your mind is in your mind where it belongs. And whatever is in your mind is on your mind, goes through your mind, and stays there. At last, my fingers stumble into my pocket and pull out a little gold roach clip with the head of an animal. This is where all joints come to an inevitable end. I squeeze the long neck and the animal's mouth opens up, and I put the little smoked down butt end inside between his jagged little teeth. I put my mouth next to this little monster's metal jaw and suck in one long last drag of paschal sacrifice before the remaining embers go from red to black and wave farewell forever. All gone. Just lean right back against your favorite branch and watch your brain leak out of your ear. Hey man, this is good dope. Yeah, we just sit there, real mellow now. The rush is over, all relaxed. Time goes by. Time keeps going. A minute, an hour, a day, a month, a year, 10 years, 20, 30, 40. Time stops. What is time? And what are we? Just cruising along in the upper stratosphere, away from clocks and calendars? We are stoned, just floating stones. Blotto, we just float freely now, free floating, relaxed. We are gone with the wind. Then we are very relaxed. Uh-oh, says Alicia. I gotta go pee. Me too, I say. I could get into that, remarks Haligman, but that means we gotta get down. Yes, down we now have to get, back down to earth, our bodies calling us back, physical reality once more exerting its magnetic force upon our floating souls. Look down at the ground. Man, that is far away. That is going to be difficult. Slowly this time, one by one, we make our way back down to that bottom branch. Hold on to it, lower yourself down. Easy does it. That's right. Just hang there for a second. Now let go. Thud. Bump goes the spacecraft. Landed. Now, where to pee? How about that clump of trees over there? All hidden, nobody to see us. Let's go there. Into the trees I go. Stand facing a tree. Look at the tree trunk. Watch an ant crawl up the tree trunk. Fascinating. While my bladder relaxes and I sigh with relief. After me, in goes Haligman. After Haligman, hey, I can't go in there, says Alicia. What if somebody sees me? What if I get arrested? I can see it now. Rabbi's son arrested for perversion in public garden. It would knock him over. Oh man, that's ridiculous. Just go ahead. Finally, all trepidation, in goes Alicia, a criminal's fear sneaking through his bones. We see his back. Click! Huh? What happened? Esther, where'd you get that camera? From my pocket. Oh no, evidence, moans Alicia, unable to move, unable to run, unable to protest in any way, still riveted to the spot while the floodgates are open. How could you do that to me? What if someone sees the pictures? We'll take a dozen glossies, I say. Alicia, you'll love it, Esther says. Someday you'll look back on it and you'll remember that once you were a stoned out freak peeing against a tree right outside in a public park. It'll be precious. I'll bet, he says skeptically. Out comes Alicia, a strange mixture of guilt and giggles. Your turn, Esther, he says. I don't gotta go, she says coyly. But then in goes Caleb, sniffs a minute, picks up his leg, and follows the rest of us. Let's go lie down over there, says Esther. And so we all go lie down beneath the bush, our heads together, while our legs stick out like the spokes of a wheel. Everything is still light, still floating but less so, lying there, looking up at the sky, which just a few minutes ago we were floating through like dandelion weeds. Blue, blue, and big fat clouds. Man, it's sure good to get out of the house, says Haligman. First with the cleaning, then with the seders, all that rush. Diane and I were really getting on each other's nerves. I had to escape for a while. Oh, it was good for me too, says Alicia. Seder with my folks was rough, with their being all upset about the way I live my life. They don't seem to realize that it's my life, and I can do with it what I please. And then Esther reaches up a hand, unseen to anyone else, and tickles my ear. Spring really turns me on, she says. We just continue to lie there, our bodies growing heavier, our backs pressing down into the fertile earth, looking up, watching the sky, beneath a lilac tree on which the flowers still were yet to bloom. Passover in the park.
Good. That's great. Wow. So the comments that have come through while you've been reading, which is just amazing, is they all end up meshuggah.
Yeah.
That's the best description of getting stoned ever. And this is the Jewish fear and loathing, but it's joy and laughter. So that's what some of what we got. What did you want us to get from this story?
Okay. Well, there's two things going on, and I think some of you got it right away, and some of you may have not been paying attention to it. But on one hand, it's Passover, and they're young, and that's what I wanted to get. I wanted to get this sense of youth and springtime and exuberance and fun and freedom and being out in nature and just the fun of it all. And that's very much in sync with Passover. And that's one layer of it. On the other hand, there is, and I don't want to tell people how to read a story. Everybody has a right to read the story their own way. But there's another story going on. And if you just follow the physical motions of the story, you see what's going on. They cross over a little body of water. They go into this big open natural space where they're free. First they do sing a little, they dance a little, and then they go up to a higher place where they have an out of mind psychedelic experience, which ends up in a little gold roach clip with the head of an animal. And then their bodies start to bring them back, the physical reality brings them back, and they have to come back down to earth. And they come back down to earth. Eventually they're lying back on the ground, almost turning into the ground, sinking into the ground, becoming part of the ground, beneath the bush on which the flowers still were yet to bloom. The history is to come.
They didn't have to spend 40 years there.
And it's a different Passover story, right? It's a Passover story we all recognize. And the two are playing off against each other. I wouldn't say this is the way you should see it and that's the way you should see it. But the two stories speak to each other. They bounce off each other. It's a little shot and drosh. But it's also, I think it was very much in keeping what life was like for us then in the Havurah. I mean, we were young, we were exciting, life was exciting, we were exuberant. And on the other hand, we saw ourselves in the scope of the great tradition, and we knew it. And we played with it, and we saw ourselves within this mythical and symbolic world as much as we were American youth living out the youth culture of the 1970s.
Will you read us some more?
I'd be happy to. I have another story. It's a little longer, and I think we're okay with time. Let's see. All right. All right. This one, it's called Of Turbot and a Turret. And when I was young, I I thought it was turbo, and I found out that it's turbot, and that's the the correct pronunciation, because I had never even known how to pronounce it. Anyway, it's called Of Turbot and a Turret. I can take a drink of water because my mouth is a little dry. Ah, now that we've finished Shabbos dinner and are full and satisfied, and there's nothing more we could ask for, or so it seems, and now that we are done with the interminable Birkat Hamazon, let me tell you the story of a different dinner I had one Friday night a couple of years ago. In the old days, there was magic in the air. Everything went right. Everything was an adventure. People were less afraid of doing the right thing because the straight and narrow was really a broad, expanding highway down which you could roam in all directions, like a child in a field of poppies, without worrying about crossing over into some improper realm past the mean no trespassing sign of forbidden territory. That's not to say that everything was up for grabs, but rather that once the restrictions were lifted, we were certain that newer, more human directions would be found, growing from essential truths rather than imposed on us from received conceptions. Oh, but enough of this. I don't mean to preach, and sometimes I can sound that way. Back then, those were the days when Esther and I were lovers, or were having an affair, or were enjoying sleeping together as friends, or were getting it together, or whatever you call it. I don't know what to call it because we ourselves didn't quite know what it was, and we weren't pushing too hard for a definition. Because, well, we didn't need a definition at the time. We were young and we enjoyed each other's company. It was simple, although perhaps not really quite that simple because nothing ever is. But that was sufficient for a while at least. It was a Friday night. The lights were low and the house was neat, as happens miraculously once a week in that brief period between Friday afternoon and Saturday evening, after which, like the world, due to no one's fault in particular, it returns to its normal state of chaos and confusion. But now it was beautiful. Our counterculture hippie house turned into a palace. And something delicious was cooking in the oven. A wonderful aroma filled the whole downstairs, permeating the air like a friendly incense. Something delicious was cooking in the oven. Services had just ended. Everyone had gone around and hugged each other, exchanged some words, said good Shabbos, a process that sometimes takes as long as the services themselves, sometimes even longer. Certainly, it was as much fun, and it was a basic, although unofficial Chavura activity. The hugging and chatting were about over, and people were going off in little groups of 2, 5, 6, or whatever to enjoy Shabbos dinner in various homes. As it happened, this week, the people living in the Chavura house were on guests. To be on guests meant making sure that any Shabbos guests from out of town had a place to eat and feel welcome. It's a lovely task, to be sure, full of mitzvahs and good deeds that get stored up in the world to come. But tonight, we knew, was going to be a strange night. Alicia, Esther, and I, who were the members of the house eating at home that particular Shabbos, were expecting two guests. One was a woman whom Alicia had invited, his own personal guest, a quiet, pretty woman with long black hair, whom Alicia, with his new outlook on life, was simply aching to get to know better. And the second, who had called earlier in the week to let us know that he was coming, was Samuel Goodman. How can I begin to describe Samuel Goodman? If the Chavura is made up of monsters with 1 foot in one world and 1 foot in the other, he was a monster too, but with 1 foot in one world and 2 feet in the other. And his 2 feet were in what he liked to call the yeshivische Welt. Goodman didn't know whether to make the leap and throw over his academic studies entirely and commit himself to living in a yeshiva, or whether he should become a hippie with a yarmulke. He couldn't figure out whether he was a Baal Tshuva or a free thinker. He was terrified of women and painfully awkward around them, which of course made it easier to be a Baal Tshuva. Full of tics and stutters, dressed like his mother's little 12-year-old in baggy pants, a pot belly bulging at his middle, he didn't cut a dashing figure. But his heart was sweet and good, humble and meek. Without a doubt, he caused himself more pain than he caused others. Good Shabbos, Samuel. How are you? I asked. Baruch Hashem, he said, his head bobbling up and down. I don't remember your name. I'm sorry. It's Solomon, I said. We've met 100 times before. I know. I just didn't remember. It slipped my mind. That's okay. No big deal. Well, I heard you're staying for Shabbos. That's right. I walked all the way from Brookline. That's a long walk. You could have taken a bus. I know, but the bus ride might have lasted into Shabbos. I was a little late and I didn't want to be on the bus when Shabbos came. Well, you could have gotten off the bus before Shabbos and walked for wherever it let you off. It might have been easier. I know, he said. He looked a little panic-stricken when he realized this possibility, as if he'd been caught sinning. I just didn't want to do that. Okay, well, no matter. Esther walked over to greet the guest. Good Shabbos, Samuel. How are you? Oh, I'm fine. Good Shabbos. I'm fine, he stammered. Esther's presence upset him, although he tried to be calm. He looked at her very quickly up and down, and then he turned to me. Is that dinner? It smells good. Well, what is it? It's fish, I said. Doesn't it smell good? It's got mushrooms and cheese and spices. In fact, it should be delicious. Oh, fish, he said, half dreaming. What kind of fish is it? What kind? It's turbot. Turbot, he exclaimed, and his eyes filled with fear. Yeah, turbot. Cheapest fish in the supermarket. Is that okay? Oh my God, he said nervously. Turbot. What's the matter? You don't like turbot? It's not kosher, he said, with the terror of scandal in his voice. What do you mean it's not kosher? Of course it's kosher. It's not kosher, he insisted. Gee, I always thought it was kosher. I said, it's like a halibut or a cod or something like that. That would make it kosher, I suppose. How do you know it's not kosher? I asked my Rebbe. I saw it in the market too, and I'd never heard of it before. So I went and I asked my Rebbe if it was kosher, and he said no. Esther turned to me and said, well, we sure have been eating a lot of it lately. Yeah, but I still think it's kosher, I answered. My Rebbe says it isn't. Well, let's ask Alicia. He should know. Hey, Alicia, come here for a second. Alicia, who'd been talking in great earnest to his black-haired guest, came over. She followed behind. Hi, Samuel. Good Shabbos. How are you? Alicia said. Baruch Hashem, he said, again nodding up and down. Alicia, I said, Samuel said that his Rebbe said that turbot isn't kosher. Is that true? Alicia just looked blank for a moment. Then he stuck out his lower lip, made a vague gesture with his hand, and said, I don't know. I thought it was kosher. Why shouldn't it be? Doesn't it have fins and scales? I don't know, I said. I never saw it except cut up into fillets in the supermarket display case. But I think it's kosher. Maybe it's not. What did your Rebbe say? Esther asked. Did he know what kind of fish it was? Or did he just say, don't eat it if you don't know what it is? He said not to eat it. He said he didn't think it was kosher. He wasn't sure? No. But he said, don't eat it. Well, I said, maybe he was just playing it safe. Well, Samuel said, shifting from foot to foot, a bit uncomfortable, I wouldn't want to do what my Rebbe told me not to. I can understand that, I said. I certainly wouldn't want you to go against what your Rebbe said. Alicia, always genial, agreed. Sure, I wouldn't go against your Rebbe, he said, slowly shaking his head. Not me, Esther said, putting her hand to her chest. I wouldn't want you to go against your Rebbe. Not me. The three of us stood there, shaking our heads slowly, disclaiming all disloyalty to one's Rebbe, while Samuel shifted from foot to foot, and Alicia's black-haired friend stood silently by, her hands behind her back. Not me. No, sir, not me. I wouldn't, not me. Well, said Samuel finally, what do we do about dinner? We'll have to throw it out. I looked at Esther. She looked at me. We looked at Alicia. He looked back at us. We should throw it out, I said. But then what's for dinner? But it's not kosher, Samuel insisted. Said Alicia. Said Esther. I said. And Alicia's black-haired friend looked on, in turn looking at each of us, her eyes wide and expecting. Well, said Alicia with authority, I guess we can't eat it. But then we'll have to do something else for dinner, I said. Then an idea came to me. Listen, I said, we'll have to eat at different houses. Let's ask if we can eat with other people in the Havurah. If we split up, they can make room for us. How about that? Would that be okay with you, Samuel? I guess so, he said. I'm sorry for the inconvenience. No inconvenience at all, I answered. I'll be right back. I dashed across the street to Max and Rebecca's. They opened the door. They were on the verge of saying Kiddush. I explained the situation and asked if they had room for one more. Samuel. Sure, said Rebecca, always generous. Send them over. I ran back across the street. Samuel, I said, I've arranged dinner for you with Max and Rebecca. Is that okay? It's okay, he replied, with me. But what will you do for dinner? You can't eat the fish. It's treif. Well, we'll probably figure something out. Open a can of tuna fish or something like that. We'll scrounge up something. Is that okay? Tuna fish for Shabbos dinner? Sure. But Max and Rebecca were all set to say Kiddush, so don't keep them waiting. Oh my God, I don't want to miss Kiddush. No, I guess not. Well, bye-bye. Good Shabbos. Have a good dinner. And with that, he scooted out the door and ran across the street. We watched him go, turned to each other, and laughed. Well, what do we do now? I asked. Indeed. What do we do? Could we just lie to Samuel and go ahead and happily eat a turbot now that it was suspect? Do we throw it out only on the grounds that it might be suspect? Does Samuel's Rebbe decide for us too? Well, I'm not against eating it, Esther said. Well, neither am I, said Alicia. I don't think it's treif. But on the other hand, we can't just lie to Samuel like that. He turned to his dark-haired friend. Would you eat it? She looked back at him with total innocence. Sure, I'd eat it. I'd eat it too, I said. Well, said Alicia, we all agree that we'd all eat it. So what do we do with it? Esther, forever ready to turn to the devices of modern convenience, had a bright idea. Let's eat it with plastic forks on paper plates. That way, even if it does turn out to be treif, we won't have treifed anything up. Alicia looked at her, then at me. He scratched his cheek. Then the rabbi spoke. Well, I guess, he said hesitantly, but do we just eat it here in the dining room like a regular Shabbos dinner if it's suspect? Listen, I said, why don't we eat separately? Esther and I will take our portions up to my room, and you two can eat in Alicia's room. That way it's just like our personal decision. How about that? Esther, I could tell, liked the idea. Alicia, after scratching his cheek for a minute, liked the idea too. He turned to his friend. Would that be okay with you? He asked again, a bit hesitantly. She smiled a small smile and shrugged her shoulders. Okay. Great, no problem, I exclaimed. Then, in an instant, a flurry of activity began. We ran into the kitchen, going to shelves, into drawers, pulling out paper plates, plastic forks and knives, glass Yortzeit tumblers, which, since they were glass, were unable to attract traphus to their non-porous surfaces, according to the Rabbanim, getting the challahs and pulling the salad out of the refrigerator. Everything was ready in no time at all, stacked on trays and ready to be taken upstairs into the land of no contradictions. All that was left was the fish. Esther went over to the oven. We all gathered around and she opened the oven door and, with a pot holder, slid out the fish. And there it was, two great big white fillets of turbot, like two great slabs of leviathan, covered with spices and mushrooms, swimming in a light sauce and giving off a strong, delicious aroma that went right to our readying appetites. Yum! The level of excitement rose in each of us. We were hungry and filled with anticipation. Quickly, we divided up the fish with our plastic knives, put it onto paper plates, and took the whole thing up to our rooms. Have a good dinner, I said to the two of them. Alicia was a little embarrassed. Yeah, you too. We will, I trilled as Esther and I hurried up the stairs. We went up to the 4th floor, to my room. Let's eat in the turret, I suggested, and Esther quickly agreed. I pushed back the thick curtain that covered the entrance to the turret. It was cold inside and pitch black. I brought over my electric heater, plugged it in, turned it on, and within a few seconds, a soft orange glow lit up the bottom of that little room. We could barely see the wooden walls around us and over our heads, and as they converged to the peak, they disappeared into the blackness. We sat down on the cushions on the floor and spread out our feast between us. Oh, we forgot some napkins. Wait a minute, I'll be right back. I jumped up, found my way through the opening, and hurried down the stairs. On my way down to the kitchen, I passed Alicia's room. The two of them were sitting at a tiny table, and Alicia was leaning forward, talking again in great earnest, while his dark-haired guest sat staring across at him, silently, her eyes wide and innocent. I hurried on. I grabbed some napkins and hurried back upstairs. The turret had already begun to warm up, and Esther had neatly arranged our dinner plates on the floor. All set, I said as I sat down. Do you want to say Kiddush, or shall I? You say Kiddush, Esther said. I raised the glass of wine and rattled off Kiddush by memory in one great stream of syllables. I ran together all the words which told of the marvels of creation and rest, and then of that second birth, the passage from slavery into freedom. Had I stopped to think where I was, I would undoubtedly have lost my place and been unable to continue. Then Esther removed the cloth from on top of the challah, picked up the loaf, said the motzi, sprinkled a little salt on it, and broke it in two. She handed me one piece while she pulled the innards out of her half and started to eat it. Before we start, there's one more thing, I said. What? Esther exclaimed, half peeved and half surprised. She was obviously hungry and wanted to begin our dinner. What else is there? Well, I said, I just happen to have this joint in my pocket. Oh, goody, and she clapped her hands in sudden glee. I lit the joint and took a deep toke. I handed it to Esther, who also took a deep toke. We began to relax. We each took a deep breath, another toke, and we were more relaxed. Back and forth until the joint was smoked down to a tiny little roach and went out. By then, we were very relaxed. We weren't sitting up anymore, but were lying on our sides, resting on our elbows. We began to giggle. But our appetites were still strong and hearty, and we were famished. The munchies grabbed hold of us, and with great enthusiasm, we dished out our wonderful, wonderful, wonderful Leviathan, smelling richly and sensuously of frankincense and myrrh, and we heaped up the luscious, colorful delights of the garden, covered with spices and oil, next to our mythic creature of the deep, on our paper plates and with our plastic forks. What a marvelous feast it was! There was wine and challah and all types of delicacies. Everything was delicious. Our taste buds were sensitive and grateful. Pleasure was bursting on our tongues and then sliding down and satisfying a deeper, hidden appetite inside. We ate and laughed and drank and were happy. We were fascinated with every bite we took. That such wonderful things could be was beyond us. All we could do was eat joyfully and be thankful. The heater glowed and made the turret warmer and warmer, a toasty, cozy warm. We didn't talk much, but our eyes twinkled with delight and satisfaction as we gobbled up everything leaf by leaf and morsel by morsel and drained our cups until the last drops were gone. We licked the rims of our glasses and mopped up our plates. At last we were finished. There was nothing left to eat, and we were no longer hungry for any sort of food. We felt warm and well fed, and our skin was now being toasted from both inside and out. And now we were hungry again. Another appetite blossomed within us, stoked by the fire of our new warmth and well-being. The understanding between us at that moment was one of perfect harmony, and we grew tremendously excited by what we knew was to follow next. We pushed our plates aside, not carelessly, yet with great liveliness. Piece by piece, layer by layer, we removed our earthly garments. We stretched out on the cushions, and the orange glow of the heater illuminated our bodies with a bright and cheerful light. I won't bore you with the details of what happened next, although I'm sure that the details wouldn't bore you at all. We went this way and that, doing one thing after another, repeating our feast again, with all its savor and fascination that such wondrous things can be. The turret closed around us, holding us safely within it, and its tapering top stretched up into the sky, while we lay at the bottom as if in the mouth of a fruitful horn of plenty, in a magical tetrahedron, the inhabitants of a dark and wooded bower that stretched up like the tents of the righteous, way above our heads. At last we were done, immobile, wrapped around each other, feeling full and satisfied. We were silent for a long time, until finally Esther spoke. "Thank God that turbo's trafe," she said with satisfaction. "But it's not trafe. It's kosher," I said. "That's the whole point of it all." Then, in a voice that betrayed a tiny, tiny bit of peeve and disappointment, she asked me softly, "That's not the whole point of it, is it?" I paused. I heard the heater's steady hum and felt its warm air blow over me. Deep in the midst of my deep sensation of well-being, I gave a little, tiny start. "No," I said slowly, measuring my words. "I suppose it's not the whole point." And then I was silent, and I listened to the hum of the heater droning on into the night. Turbo in a turret.
Oh, man. All right. So I can't imagine that I'm the only person who, while listening to your story, checked. And Google is our current Rav. And it does appear that turbot is kosher, except for some version of European turbot, which is Thalmus Maximus of Picetta Maximus. But other than that, yes, it does appear.
Thank goodness. Thank goodness. Good to know.
Before we move on, I want to hear more about what you were thinking in this piece, but I also wanted to really remind everyone that I'd love it if people, people have posted some comments, but I'm not sure if there's specifically questions that we want to raise. So I want you to explain a little bit about what you were thinking in this writing, and then maybe we'll see if other people have some questions.
Okay. I would like to share something really quick.
Oh, please.
When I was a little kid, my parents brought home an album of, when I was like 10 and 11 years old. Theodore Bickel sings Jewish folk songs, and it's a wonderful album. And there's a song in it called "The Sudenu," the feast, and it's about what's going to happen when the Messiah comes. And there's a student who asks the Rebbe, he says, "Zog mir Rebbeinu, was wird sein, als Mashiach wird kommen? What's going to happen when the Messiah comes?" And he says, "Als Mashiach wird kommen, vel mir machna sudenu." We're going to make a great feast. And he says, "Vaj vel mir essen after sudenu." What are we going to eat at the feast? And the Rebbe says, "Dem shorabor, midden levio wo wosin." We're going to eat the wild ox and the leviathan. And then he goes on to say all the other wonderful things that are going to happen at this feast. Miriam's going to dance, and King David's going to play, and Moshe is going to teach us Torah. And this was a very important song for me when I was growing up, and I would like to share it. It's 3 minutes long. It's absolutely marvelous, and then I'll have something to say. Here we go. I share screen.
Right.
I want to bring up a Sudenu. Wait, I gotta share computer sound. Share that. Share computer sound. Share screen and share. Okay, here we go.
Zog je mir Rebbeinu, wo je wird sein, als Mashiach wird kommen.
Als Mashiach wird kommen, will mir machen a Sudenu.
Wo je will mir essen auf der Sudenu.
Dem Shorabor, mit Leovosen. Dem Shorabor, mit Leovosen. Dem Scheuersen will mir essen, auf der Sudenu.
Wer je wird uns Chochme sagen auf der Sudenu.
Shloime, am Shloime, am Shloime uns Chochme sagen, Moshe uns eure sagen, jenem Schummer will mir trinken, Scheuersen will mir essen. Auf der Sudenu.
Wer wird uns tanzen auf der Sudenu?
Oy Miriam, Aneviu. Oy Miriam, Aneviu. Miriam Aneviu wird uns tanzen, David Amelach wird uns spielen, Schleime Amelach Chochme sagen, Moshe Rabbeinu teure sagen, jenem Schummer will mir trinken, Scheuersen will mir essen. Oy der Sudenu.
Okay, Now I have to get back. Oh, stop share.
Done.
Okay, done. Okay, so that's what it's about. You know, it's the time when the Messiah comes will also be a return to Eden. And so in this story, what happens is Solomon and Esther have a moment of paradise, a moment of Eden, a moment of messianic times, because it was from this song that I learned that when we get to Eden, or when we get to the Messianic feast, we're going to eat the Leviathan. And so their turbot turns into Leviathan, and they have the delights of the garden, and their back is Adam and Eve, and they have this moment of paradise. But of course, it's just a moment. You know, Shabbos is Tam Gan Eden, but it's just a Tam. It's just a taste of Eden, and then reality at the end starts to come in, and they're not exactly on the same place, and that's what the story's about. So
I would love to hear one more story, but I want to ask some of the questions that have come through, just because
sure.
we want it to be a collective experience.
Okay, I'm going to look at all the people. I haven't been able to see everybody. It's been very disconcerting because I haven't been able to get the feedback, and that's been difficult. So let me see faces. Faces! Yay! Okay. But I do want to see you, Doron. So where are you? Oh, there you are. Okay.
Okay. So Joel wanted to know what was the most frustrating aspect of creating this book? The expense, the time, what were the difficulties?
The hardest thing was the sense of publishing failure. You know, I pitched it around as far as I knew how to do, and I actually got more success than I realized at the time, because I did get pieces of it published, but the whole thing never saw the light of day, and it was just, you know, whatever. I tried it, and that was the most frustrating thing. Was the sense of trying to get it published and not getting published, and I spoke to a shrink for 2 years who tried to tell me, you know, there's not a big audience out there for this. And it took me 2 years to get that through my head. But this is a wonderful thing, is that you never know where life's going to bring you. And here we are today, 40 years later, and it's out there. And it's wonderful to see you all.
Ina asked, what did you edit the most in the 40-year span? What did you find you needed to change?
Two things. One, it needed a lot of little wordsmithing. I mean, there were redundancies, there are words, sometimes I used the wrong word. And so I had to really go through it. I saw typos. I had to go through it really carefully, word by word. Also, the biggest thing that needed editing was the very opening, where Solomon welcomes the guest into the Chavura house. When I was first writing it, I just wrote so much about the house, and everything had meaning, and every little picture and every piece of furniture and every room, that I realized that it didn't get the reader, into the book quickly enough. And then the reader would say, this is boring. And so I had to pare that down a lot more.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Other questions? Someone asked about a link to the book. I've just put that into the chat for those who want it. It was Anne who asked for that. Other questions, or should we read some more?
If you want to hear one more,
yeah.
I have one that's very short, which it's only like 5 minutes, and I think that'll do it. And it's very different from the others. It's a little bit like a prose poem. And I think it's misunderstood. So anyway, it's called A Day in May. It was a beautiful day, but I hadn't known it was a beautiful day because I'd spent the whole day indoors typing. I hated to type, but I had to do it, so I did it. While I was typing, I turned on the radio. Too noisy, too noisy. I couldn't concentrate on my typing, so I shut the radio off. After a few hours, as it grew later into the afternoon, I decided I had typed enough. I'll leave it for later, do only a few pages a day from now on, and get some other work done instead. I picked up a book, and a ripped flannel shirt, just in case it was cold, and I went outside. Outside, it wasn't cold, and I took a chair from the porch and put it under a tree in the backyard. The trees above me were in their early spring bloom, and a soft green light bounced off the little leaves. The flower buds were pink. I sat there reading, and suddenly Krishna jumped up next to me onto the edge of the chair. I hadn't seen him coming, was startled, and when I started, Krishna got scared in return and jumped off the chair. Warily, he sat down a few paces away. Krishna's the cat. Suddenly, along the fence, crawling in the still naked grapevines that twisted in and out of the metal chinks, came a scruffy-looking squirrel. I watched the squirrel scamper along the vines and towards a strange-looking, dry, flat object caught in the vines. It looked like a flattened mushroom or a colorless piece of desiccated orange peel. The squirrel approached the object, picked it up quickly, and put it to his mouth. Then I realized what the object was. It was a piece of pita, all dried out. How it got caught there, I had no idea. Maybe when the dogs broke into our trash, some stale pita fell out. And maybe this pita was picked up by an animal or the wind and ended up being caught in the grapevines. But who knows? Maybe someone had put it there for the birds. Anyway, the squirrel began to take a few tiny bites on the pita, chewing in a tiny chewing motion. He ate gingerly, and the noise made a little rasp, chick, chick, as he nibbled and chewed. Suddenly, I remembered that today was Yom HaAtzmaut. How could I have forgotten? The squirrel kept eating the pita, holding the piece of pita in both hands in front of his face. It looked too large for him. In fact, it looked like I look when I try to eat a falafel. But the squirrel was making a much better job of it, eating rhythmically, chick, chick, rasp, rasp, while I eat falafel very sloppily, first from this end, then from the other, trying to keep from eating all the salad first and then being left with the dry falafel balls on the bottom, trying to keep the falafel balls from falling out through a tear in the pita, trying to keep the tahina from dribbling all over my arm. I stared at the squirrel as he stood there, upright and alert, eating his pita as if it were the most natural thing in the world for him to do, and I held my breath. I just watched him. So did Krishna. Suddenly, for no apparent reason, the squirrel got very nervous. He stopped eating. He looked at me, and he looked at Krishna, who were both looking at him. Then he took the pita in his teeth and scrambled along the fence towards a branch. He hopped up and jumped along the branch, holding the pita, flying from branch to branch, grabbing onto swaying twigs and up the branch of another tree. He ran all the way up the tree, far above our heads now, and I could no longer see him. He was gone. Silence. Then I heard it, chick, chick, rasp, rasp, up above my head somewhere. I looked and couldn't find it, where it was coming from. Then the noise stopped, and it didn't start again. I went back to my reading. I stopped. I put the flannel shirt on the ground next to me and tried to go back to reading. Krishna sneaked a little closer to my chair and sat down. I turned the page. I reached out and petted Krishna, scratching his neck under the chin. A bird flew along the fence, and Krishna looked at it. The bird flew away. A neighbor from next door started to hang out her laundry from the second floor balcony. It was shirts and pants. There were also 2 towels and a few socks. Then she went in. Suddenly, one of the legs of my chair cracked, and the chair lurched backward, and I fell off balance. I got up and looked at it, and I saw that the wood had completely snapped. I picked up the chair and leaned it against the wooden pole in the yard. I sat back down and started to read again. It wasn't too comfortable that way, because the chair wobbled. I closed my book, picked up my shirt, and walked inside. Inside, a man was fixing the stove. He nodded at me. I walked upstairs to my room. I opened the window. I put my shirt in the closet and laid the book on my desk. Then I lay down on my bed, looking up at the ceiling. The ceiling was blank. I just stared at the ceiling. And as I stared, fixing my eyes on no point in particular, memories swooped down upon me like a phantom bat and swallowed me up completely. That's it.
Yeah. Everyone seems to say that hearing your thought process in these pieces has been so meaningful, and it's the text and the context. So do you want to share anything about this story?
Not a whole lot. I think it's a story that's to make people think. Obviously, I think, well, what it's about it's us as Americans and our relationship to Israel, and sometimes we're very tuned in, and sometimes we don't realize it, and it can just fall off the radar of our thinking, and it's always there in the background, but we don't always relate to it, and it's problematic, and it's deep meaning, and yet we don't even think about it sometimes, and more than that, I don't want to say. I think people should just read it and use it as a way to just think symbolically, open your mind, and just let it flow.
So we have a few more minutes left, and so I want to ask people to pose their questions. And that, however, Gabriel has asked what is kind of the eternal question that everybody who's on this Zoom probably has their own answer to, and it may be an impossible question, which is, what is a Havurah?
What is what?
A Havurah. A
Chavura is a fellowship. It is a group, and that's really what it is. It's a fellowship, a group. If you go, and I'm not a scholar, but if you go back to ancient times, also there were people who had things that were called Chavurot, like the Essenes in the desert had a Chavura, a small group, and then it became the name for what we were doing. We had this small intentional community, and now it spawned this thing that was called the Chavura Movement, in which people would make small groups within their own synagogues, because some of the benefits you get from celebrating together in a small group and people getting to know each other very, very well and celebrating together can lead to enormously greater benefits than just if you're part of a large congregation and don't necessarily feel connected with the others.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Are you working on anything else?
Not at the moment. Who knows? I retired, so now maybe things will open up again. But I spent 40 years not doing any more fiction. I spent my career sitting in front of a computer writing, but a very different kind of writing. I was doing corporate communications, writing ephemera for the business world. And when people sometimes asked me, they said, "Well, are you going to write any more?" And I'd say, I spend my whole day sitting at a computer writing. When I come home, I don't want to write anymore. I want to see my kids and get some exercise and things like that. But who knows? Now
that you got the time, the bug might itch, right?
Yeah, you never know.
If there aren't any more official questions, I invite people to unmute, and you could have a little schmooze time before we close the day.
Sharon, it's Alex Friedman. I have a question for David.
Go for it.
David, I know we've talked a lot about your experience, but I would love to hear what you would have to say about how the Havurah influenced who you are today.
Well, one of the things about the Havurah, it was a place where I made an enormous amount of friends, and that was just that was wonderful. And I think that quality of it is knowing that I have all these friends has been really, really marvelous. How has it otherwise influenced me? You know, religious life was very intense at the Chavura. Leaving the Chavura, and at some point you have to leave the Chavura. We were all in our 20s and life took us in different directions, and you saw your friends go. So you gave that up. And I'd say Chavura in some ways has left me with a sense that at one point that part of my life was more intense, and now it's not. I don't know.
It's Gary Bean.
Hi, Gary.
Hi. I don't know. I'm getting a sense from the stories you shared with us, something about my experience in the Chavura, and I'm wondering whether it was yours. And that is, the Chavura gave me a place where I could grow, I could change, and no one would say, gee, you don't seem like yourself, or gee, I thought you did keep kosher. That it was a place where we could find our own way, and no one would keep us to the way that we showed up with. The other thing is, it gave me a sense of ownership of the tradition rather than submission to the tradition. And those two things have stayed with me, and I wonder if that was part of your experience with the Havurah too.
Well, I certainly agree with what you said, is that it gave you an amazing sense of ownership of the tradition, and it gave you a way to go into being Jewish without feeling that you had to do it according to somebody else's rubric. I didn't feel that I didn't have ownership to the tradition going in, because I felt very much part. My Judaism was a very, very big part of me as a kid and growing up. So that in that way it's different. But I agree with everything else you said before about that, sort of the wonderful way it just opened up people to feel that they could make it their own, as however they felt it, you know, they could adapt it to them.
Thanks.
This is Mark Paul. I've got a question, David. You talk about how wonderful the experience was, and Gary just talked about, you know, it enabled him to get ownership, you know, of his tradition. Paul. Such lovely experiences that were so meaningful to your life at the time and growth, etc. Are younger people today forming Havurahs and having that same experience, etc.? Because if they're not, it sounds like it's a shame.
I think there are some people who do. I'm not plugged into that anymore. You know, now I'm a member of Ansche Chesed, and it's a sort of a big conservative shul, but it's a very nice one, and I love it. I don't know what the young people are doing. I really don't. Maybe Betty Rose would know, because she's still so involved in the National Chavura Institute. And there are things that are going on, like the National Chavura Institute, which meets in the summer. And there are people who come from all over the United States to spend this week of intense, less structured Jewish life.
David?
Yeah.
Is there anything you can think of that we can do at Ansche Chesed, maybe to make it, to bring in some of the better qualities of the Havurah?
I don't even know if I want to go there. You know, I think the most important thing is that people get to know each other and become friends. And I think at Ansche Chesed we have a wonderful sense of that. And people really care about each other, and friendships become very meaningful there. How to do it? You know, I'm an old fart now. I don't have the fire in my belly anymore to say this is how we should change the world.
And it's probably not your place. You need the 20 and 30-year-olds to do it.
That's right.
Because it's for them. Eliza said that some of the younger people in the, you know, are calling them indie minions. Right?
Yeah.
And some of the young people are still
one last thing I want to tell you about the album, the Theodore Bickel album.
Oh yeah.
I once learned this, bringing back to the Chavrat Shalom. Art Green, when he was, I believe this is the story, when he was in college, Theodore Bickel came to do a concert, and Art was working on the newspaper, and he was assigned to cover the concert, and he had the opportunity to go meet Theodore Bickel and do an interview. And Theodore Bickel told him that when they did this album, Bickel wanted an authentic Lower East Side wall, and with all the posters that have Yiddish in it. And so they did this against the Lower East Side wall. But if you actually look closely at this wall, you will see in Yiddish graffiti that is some very dirty words. And I will not tell you what they are, but they're in Yiddish in Hebrew letters. So maybe that will give you the incentive to go find this album and listen to the whole thing.
David, we have the same album in our house.
Uh-oh.
David, are you going to have small group gatherings at your apartment to listen to the album?
Well, you can always find it on Spotify. Yeah.
Put the name of the album onto the chat.
Oh, okay. And it is Theodore Bickel Sings Jewish Folk Songs. And you can find it on Spotify. It's a wonderful album. And
all right.
As this was an Ansche Chesed event and the formal portion are ending, I feel like in order to keep our president happy, I want to say to the Ansche Chesed members, I hope you'll be joining us next Sunday for we have the Sounds of SNL. This is a third time rescheduled salon, not a saloon. I would think Zoom saloon, but it's a Zoom salon. And we have our annual meeting in the evening, and then the 28th we have our tribute, our virtual tribute. And I do hope you will join us and place ads to celebrate our long-term members.